In Lesson 5, you'll be introduced to one of the most important tools you'll use with JavaScript, the Document Object Model, or DOM, which lets your scripts manipulate web pages, windows, and documents. Without the DOM, JavaScript would be just another scripting language. With the DOM, it becomes a powerful tool for making pages dynamic. We will begin by discussing objects, then introduce the idea of the DOM and some of the objects you'll use most often. The topics we will cover are understanding objects, understanding the Document Object Model, or DOM, working with web documents, accessing browser history, and working with the location object. JavaScript supports objects. Like variables, objects can store data, but they can store two or more pieces of data at once. The items of data stored in an object are called the properties of the object. For example, you could use objects to store information about people, such as in an address book. The properties of each person might include a name, an address, and a telephone number. JavaScript uses periods to separate object names and property names. For example, for a person object called Bob, the properties might include bob.address and bob.phone. Objects can also include methods. These are functions that work with the object's data. For example, our person object for the address book might include a display method to display the person's information. In JavaScript terminology, the statement bob.display would display Bob's details. JavaScript supports three kinds of objects. Built-in objects are built into the JavaScript language. DOM objects represent various components of the browser and the current HTML document. Custom objects are objects you create yourself. One advantage that JavaScript has over basic HTML is that scripts can manipulate the web document and its contents. Your script can load a new page into the browser, work with parts of the browser window and document, open new windows, and even modify text within the page dynamically. To work with the browser and documents, JavaScript uses a hierarchy of parent and child objects called the Document Object Model, or DOM. These objects are organized into a tree-like structure and represent all of the content and components of a web document. The objects in the DOM have properties, which are variables that describe the web page or document, and methods, which are functions that enable you to work with parts of the web page. When you refer to an object, you use the parent object name followed by the child object name, or names, separated by periods. For example, JavaScript stores objects to represent images in a document as children of the document object. This example refers to the image9 object, a child of the document object, which is a child of the window object. The window object is the parent object for all of the objects we will be looking at in this lesson. This shows the section of the DOM object hierarchy and a variety of its objects. Starting with the introduction of JavaScript 1.0 in Netscape 2.0, browsers have included objects that represent parts of a web document and other browser features. However, there was never a true standard. While both Netscape and Microsoft Internet Explorer included many of the same objects, there was no guarantee that the same objects would work the same way in both browsers, let alone in less common browsers. The bad news is that there are still differences between the browsers. The good news is that since the release of Netscape 3.0 and Internet Explorer 4.0, all of the basic objects, including those that we will cover in this lesson, are supported in much the same way in both browsers. With more recent browser releases, a much more advanced DOM is supported. The W3C, or the World Wide Web Consortium, developed the DOM Level 1 recommendation. This is a standard that defines not only basic objects, but an entire set of objects that encompass all parts of an HTML document. A Level 2 DOM standard has also been released, and Level 3 is under development. Netscape 4 and Internet Explorer 4 supported their own DOMs that allowed more control over documents but weren't standardized. Fortunately, starting with Internet Explorer 5 and Netscape 6, both support the W3C DOM, so you can support both browsers with simple, standards-compliant code. All of today's current browsers support the W3C DOM. The basic object hierarchy described in this lesson is informally referred to as DOM Level 0, and the objects are included in the DOM Level 1 standard. The document object represents a web document or page. Web documents are displayed within browser windows, so it shouldn't surprise you to learn that the document object is a child of the window object. Because the window object always represents the current window, or the one containing the script, you can use window.document to refer to the current document. You can also simply refer to Document, which automatically refers to the current window. If multiple windows or frames are in use, there might be several window objects, each with its own document object. To use one of these document objects, you use the name of the window and the name of the document. Coming up, we will look at some of the properties and methods of the document object that will be useful in your scripting. Several properties of the document object include information about the current document in general. Document.url specifies the document's URL. This is a simple text field. You can't change this property. If you need to send the user to a different location, use the window.location object described later in this lesson. Document.title lists the title of the current page defined by the HTML title tag. Document.referrer is the URL of the page the user was viewing prior to the current page, usually the page with a link to the current page. Document.lastModified is the date the document was last modified. This date is sent from the server along with the page. Document.bgcolor and Document.fgcolor are the background and foreground text colors for the document, corresponding to the BG color and text attributes of the body tag. Document.linkColor, Document.alinkColor, and Document.vlinkColor are the colors for links within the document. These correspond to the link, A-link, and V-link attributes of the body tag. Document.cookie enables you to read or set a cookie for the document. As an example of a document property, this shows a short HTML document that displays its last modified date using JavaScript. This can tell the user when the page was last changed. If you use JavaScript, you don't have to remember to update the date each time you modify the page. You could also use the script to always print the current date instead of the last modified date, but that would be cheating. The simplest document object methods are also the ones you will use most often. In fact, you've used one of them already. The document.write method prints text as part of the HTML page in a document window. This statement is used whenever you need to include output in a web page. An alternate statement, document.writeln, also prints text, but it also includes a new line /n character at the end. This is handy when you want your text to be the last thing on the line. You can use these methods only within the body of the web page, so they will be executed when the page loads. You can't use these methods to add to a page that has already loaded without reloading it. You can write new content for a document, however, as the next section explains. The document.write method can be used within a script tag in the body of an HTML document. You can also use it in a function, provided you include a call to the function within the body of the document. Another child of the document object is the link object. Actually, there can be multiple link objects in a document. Each one includes information about a link to another location or an anchor. You can access link objects with the links array. Each member of the array is one of the link objects in the current page. A property of the array, document.links.length, indicates the number of links in the page. Each link object or member of the links array has a list of properties defining the URL. The href property contains the entire URL, and other properties define portions of it. These are the same properties as the location object, which will be defined later in this lesson. You can refer to a property by indicating the link number and property name. For example, this statement assigns the entire URL of the first link to the variable link1. The anchor objects are also children of the document object. Each anchor object represents an anchor in the current document, a particular location that can be jumped to directly. Like links, you can access anchors with an array, anchors. Each element of this array is an anchor object. The document.anchors.length property gives you the number of elements in the anchors array. The history object is another child or property of the window object. This object holds information about the URLs that have been visited before and after the current one, and it includes methods to go to previous or next locations. The history object has one property you can access. History.length keeps track of the length of the history list. In other words, the number of different locations that the user has visited. The history object has three methods you can use to move through the history list. History.go opens a URL from the history list. To use this method, specify a positive or negative number in parentheses. For example, history.go -2 is equivalent to pressing the back button twice. History.back loads the previous URL in the history list, which is equivalent to pressing the back button. History.forward loads the next URL in the history list if available. This is equivalent to pressing the forward button. A third child of the window object is the location object. This object stores information about the current URL stored in the window. For example, this statement loads a URL into the current window. The href property used in this statement contains the entire URL of the window's current location. You can also access portions of the URL with various properties of the location object. To explain these properties, consider this URL. These properties represent parts of the URL. Location.protocol is the protocol part of the URL, which is http: in the example. Location.hostname is the hostname of the URL, which is www.jsworkshop.com in the example. Location.pathname is the file name part of the URL, which is test.cgi in the example. Location.search is the query portion of the URL, if any, which is lines equals 1 in the example. Queries are used mostly by CGI scripts. Location.hash is the anchor name used in the URL, if any, which is #anchor in the example. The link object introduced earlier in the lesson also includes this list of properties for accessing portions of the URL. The location object has two methods. Location.reload reloads the current document. This is the same as the reload button on the browser's toolbar. If you optionally include the true parameter, it will ignore the browser's cache and force a reload whether the document has changed or not. Location.replace replaces the current location with a new one. This is similar to setting the location object's properties yourself. The difference is that the replace method does not affect the browser's history. In other words, the back button can't be used to go to the previous location. This is useful for splash screens or temporary pages that it would be useless to return to. You can use the back and forward methods of the history object to add your own back and forward buttons to a web document. The browser already has back and forward buttons, of course, but it's occasionally useful to include your own links that serve the same purpose. You will now create a script that displays back and forward buttons and use these methods to navigate the browser. Here's the code that will create the back button. The input tag defines a button labeled back. The onClick event handler uses the history.back method to go to the previous page in history. The code for the forward button is similar. With these out of the way, you just need to build the rest of the HTML document. This shows the complete HTML document, and Figure 5.2 shows a browser's display of the document. After you load this document into a browser, visit other URLs and make sure the back and forward buttons work. In this lesson, you've learned about the document object model, JavaScript's hierarchy of web page objects. You've learned how you can use document object to work with documents and use the history and location objects to control the current URL displayed in the browser. You should now have a basic understanding of the DOM and some of its objects. You can now test your knowledge in the quiz area, access the scripts we learned in the lab, or go through the lesson again. The choice is yours. Thank you for choosing Sam's Teach Yourself.